In this video, let's answer the question, what really is an aggregation and why do we need it? If you remember the last video, we talked about dimension and measures, and we summarized that measures are nothing but numbers and dimensions are nothing but text really. So the way I'm going to explain aggregation is by helping you answer two questions. How do we make sense of numbers and text? Once you are able to answer these two questions, why aggregation is needed and the benefits of that would be very obvious to you, I hope. Let's get started. Let's use the same data set. So how do we really make sense of numbers? Let's take the salary number here. It's a number we are all intimately familiar with. How do we make sense of numbers? Typically, we find the total value. So in this case, we are given 10 salary numbers of 10 employees and the total salary is 75,000. So we have taken 10 values and reduced it to one value. And how do you visualize these numbers? The 75,000 we produce. Do you remember this? The ruler or the scale that we all have used in our school days? So whenever you want to visualize numbers, I want you to think of a ruler or scale. That's how axis is drawn and the charts are plotted. So it's very helpful, for you to visualize numbers using a scale. So let's plot the 75,000 on a chart, a simple chart here, right? I just have one dot representing 75K. So how else do we make sense of numbers? We talked about totals. We talk about minimum salary. We talk about maximum average. We compare what's the average salary in this industry versus that industry. What's the max salary in a Tableau job? What's the minimum salary in a data science role? These are questions that we easily discuss with our friends. So let's take this sample data set again, just 10 numbers. What are the min and max salaries? So min is 6,000, max is 14,000. And what's the average salary? So average is a little bit complicated. So let me remind you of the equation. So it's total divided by record count. So in this case, it's total salary divided by number of employees. We know total salary is 75,000 and we know the record count, the number of employees is 10. So that gives us 7,500. So now that we have gotten these three values, let's plot all these three values, right? So you are able to see min, max, average. So essentially, these are the four ways to make sense of a given set of numbers. We humans, when we are presented with more than a handful of numbers, we want to reduce that down to a manageable size. Really, whether it's 10 numbers, 100 numbers or a million numbers, we want to bring it down to a few numbers really. That's where these four numbers are helpful: total, min, max and average. In most data sets, the first thing that we want to discuss or understand is total. So that's why it's a default in most of the BI tools, including Tableau. So let's give these four values a name. So what's a good name for these four things? Total, min, max, average. So before giving a name, let's summarize what we are doing here. We take a whole set of numbers and reduce it to one value. Then we get this one number which tells us something of value about the whole set of numbers, isn't it? So we got one number which informs us about the characteristics of the rest of the numbers. So let's take a quick diversion that would help us to find a good name. Do you know Marshall Goldsmith? He is one of the best executive coaches of America and you can read more about him here. So here is a famous book that he wrote. Let's assume one of your friends comes to you and tells you that he has read the book. So what would you ask him? So you'll ask him, oh, what are the key points? So when we are presented with a lot of information, naturally we want to summarize things, right? So we want to reduce it to a few pieces of information. So in school, we have read big stories and summarized them, right? It's the same process we are doing here, isn't it? We take a chunk of values here, being a sample data set, it's just 10 records and reducing it to one value. In essence, so we are summarizing. So I would say summarizing is a great name for this process. So the output value we get is a summary number, the total, average, minimum, maximum. Aggregation is a more technical name. So otherwise it's exactly the same. If you are a statistician, maybe you will say, oh, average, min, max, or descriptive statistics. But anyway, the aim of my tutorial is not to really explain these to statisticians, but for normal business people who find it hard to understand these jargons. So let's go back to the process and break that down into a step-by-step process. Step 1, we got a set of input values. Here we got 10 records that tells us about 10 salary numbers of 10 employees. Then we apply a function, whether it is a sum or min, max, average, that's what we applied. And then we got a single output summary value, and here we just display it, or we can display it in the form of a chart. So of the two questions we started with, we answered the first question, how do we make sense of numbers? And I hope what is aggregation and the benefit of that is very clear to you. We as humans, we have an innate need to reduce anything great to a small and manageable chunk of things. That's where really aggregation fits in. So in a way, it's an innate human trait that aggregation or summarization is helping us with. Now let's move on to the second question. How do we make sense of text? I'll cover this in a separate video.